Welcome to the Two Tokens podcast, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Elsa. Elsa, you're from VerifyVASP.
I am General Manager for VerifyVASP for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Yes, Johnny.
Oh my goodness! And I had the delightful time with you in Korea, with another mutual client, Upbit in Korea.
That's right. Yes, we went to the Upbit conference. Yeah,
which was fascinating. Loved your LinkedIn post about Korean culture. And how the ladies had sort of dominated sort of the temples and the sort of thinking.
Absolutely. Korean shamanism, for anybody interested, is really fascinating, and definitely look into it. Yeah.
Definitely worth looking at. But before we move on, I'd love you to explain tell me a little bit about you, because you've done all sorts of things, I know.
I have.
And then VerifyVASP, how it came about, and what role does it have in this sort of ecosystem of sort of DLT, blockchains, and tokenization?
Sure. So I have a background, much like yourself, in traditional finance. I worked for varieties of investment banks and capital markets. My last corporate, quote unquote, role was with CME Group. I was running buy-side sales internationally for them, and I was seconded to their blockchain project back in 2017. There were two things going on. They were trying to tokenize gold way back before tokenization was a cool thing. And looking to launch the Bitcoin futures contract. I very quickly decided that this was an industry I wanted to delve into, and so I resigned.
Oh my goodness.
And I set up a go-to-market strategy and execution consultancy, and very quickly I got picked up by emerging travel rule service providers. So I joined VerifyVASP just over a year ago now, after a series of other contracts. We are a travel rule service provider.
What does that mean? Travel, is that you're not an estate agent, a travel agent. You don't book flights.
No, the travel rule is a colloquialism for the implementation of FATF's recommendation 16 around the transfer of funds.
I know FATF. You should throw me all these acronyms.
Financial Action Task Force. So it's the AML-CFT watchdog, the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing watchdog.
And that's like a global body that a number of jurisdictions have bought into as standards that they want to implement in their jurisdiction.
That's absolutely
right.
Yes. There are members and associate members that cover over 200 jurisdictions are members of FATF. And if you want to remain a member in good standing of the Financial Action Task Force, then you need to comply, or you need to align to their standards, which means transposing the recommendations into your national legislation.
Right.
And so this has started happening around the world. Recommendation 16 is about transfers funds and mandatory information that has to travel along with the transaction in case of transfer of funds. In 2019, the FATF announced that this existing legislation now needed to apply to crypto asset transfers. And so FATF Recommendation 15 requires licensing of virtual asset service providers, and FATF Recommendation 16 requires the travel rule.
Right. So that's why you've got jurisdictions like the UK, we have VASP, virtual asset service providers, and in Europe you have CASPs, crypto asset service providers.
Yes, that's right. So that's a first challenge that anyone who is wondering whether they fall into one of these categories needs to really dig into. You need to figure out if what you're doing is a crypto asset service provider activity, or in other jurisdictions, maybe a virtual asset service provider activity. And each jurisdiction may define that slightly differently. So you may find that you have two legal entities, and one is a CASP in the EU, and one is deemed not a VASP in another jurisdiction.
Wow. Hence, people need a bit of hand-holding through some of these rules and regulations.
Absolutely.
And what does VerifyVASP do? What very, the elevator pitch, what simplistically?
So if you think of this private information that needs to travel now with the crypto asset transfer, the blockchain does not lend itself well to anonymizing private information such as name, date of birth, really verified information. So when this recommendation was released and certain countries enacted it quite quickly, it came to light that there really were no service providers, third-party service providers that provided the technology to fully encrypt and decrypt that information, that highly sensitive personal information. And so we are a software as a service provider. We provide an API. We operate a decentralized protocol within a verified network.
Right.
So we basically help VASPs, CASPs, encrypt and decrypt, comply with this requirement by encrypting and decrypting that information.
Yeah, because one of the problems that presumably if you're going to be sharing personal information, you run into sort of GDPR.
Correct.
So and you don't want to have personal information on a blockchain because some of these blockchains you can't remove that, therefore you can't exercise your right to be forgotten.
That's absolutely right. And in the EU, it's not just GDPR. You also have the Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA.
DORA, anti-DORA's coming down very soon.
Which, yeah. So the transfer of funds regulation kicks in on the 30th of December, which is the same day that the licensing requirements begin under MiCA. There is a there's a transition period for licensing, which can range from 0 days to 18 months, but there is no grandfathering period for transfer of funds regulation. So you will need to be travel compliant from day one. The EBA, the European Banking Authority, has given a little bit of a grace period, meaning you are still able to use technical solutions that may not be fully compliant until end of July 2025. So there's a lot of dates to keep in mind. And then from the minute that a CASP becomes an authorized CASP, DORA applies. And DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, is quite heavy in terms of the requirements and can be quite disruptive to potential CASP in terms of how they've set up their business. So that's something.
And it's got some real teeth. Isn't it 4% of your daily turnover, annual turnover, daily can be as a fine or something crazy?
Yeah,
it's a huge fine potentially.
The final details are not. I don't think the final RTSs are complete, but yes.
Right. So going back to VerifyVASP, if I want to deal in crypto assets, there's all sorts of rules and regulations that I would have to comply with as a company that wants to get involved in that. Does that also sweep up digital assets? So we're beginning to see more and more. I was talking to ABN AMRO, while you were in our green room, and they were talking about some of the things they've been doing at a European level as well as a Dutch level here with all sorts of real assets. So we're beginning to see more and more asset managers, particularly with money market funds, and it's again I know something we've been talking about in terms of the tokenization of the portfolio is the same at the moment. It's in a paper format. You can only deal once a day. You only get your interest, dividends, coupons every 6 months. And now that's going to be able to deal 24/7, and you can, get your payments a lot more frequently. Those digitized formats of the same underlying pool of assets, they're also going to be caught because they're using basic blockchains in DLTs, so they become very similar to a crypto asset.
So it's not the asset that's caught; it's the activity of the service provider. So in so much as these assets are being transferred or being custodied, yes, they're caught. But the mere issuance of an asset doesn't.
Yeah. So it's interesting from my perspective, having been in the financial markets for 30, nearly 40 years, unfortunately. There you go. They seem to not be regulating the outcome, but regulating the technology. Because in many ways, if you're a regulated company, you've still got to make sure you've done KYC and AML and everything else. But there's a little bit more than that now that they seem to have introduced.
So what you often hear amongst regulator circles is same activity, same risk, same regulation.
Yep.
There's a lot of debate as to whether this is indeed the same activity because of the underlying being so different. Yeah. But the risk, again, that could be debated, but this is where all of this regulation is coming from. And I think initially it was decided to regulate crypto asset service providers rather than the underlying or the individual, namely because we saw such an enormous amount of illicit activity that eventually it may happen outside of the crypto asset service provider environment, but eventually when they want to get back to fiat currency, because they all eventually want to get back into dollars or euros, they do transit through these illicit actors do transit through crypto asset service providers, and so that seemed like the correct place to regulate.
Got it. And this, your very much focus is in Europe with what you're doing at the moment, and the Middle East. We
are completely global. So the company is headquartered in Singapore. We have subsidiaries in Japan and France. We have members in 26 different jurisdictions and growing. But we see a lot of activity. We can point to a lot of activity in Southeast Asia namely because the travel rule has been around for a lot longer there. But yeah, no, we're not constrained by any jurisdiction.
And the sort of members, sort of companies that you're dealing with, they what sort of nature, without giving names of the individual clients, are they banks? Are they asset managers? Are they exchanges?
They're mostly global crypto exchanges.
Right.
So members have come to us because we don't just offer travel rule. Travel rule has a complication in the sense that there needs to be legal basis for you to be sending your client's personal information to another VASP, right? That other VASP or CASP needs to also be travel rule obliged.
Right.
If you think of a scenario where, and the majority of flows are actually from regulated exchanges to offshore exchanges that may not be regulated or travel rule obliged yet. So because we offer two solutions, we offer one that is a full travel rule solution, but we also offer what regulators have called an enhanced risk mitigation measure to be able to still compliantly transact with those offshore VASPs without legal basis of exchanging private information. And there's a way we do that. We actually limit the transaction to first party transfers only, so same name only.
Right.
And then we use a mechanism to verify the identity without actually revealing the personal information. And that's where we've won a lot of market share with some of the global exchanges.
So is that a little bit like zero knowledge proof type concept? I want to be certain. You want to be able to certain that I am Jonny Fry. You need to ascertain that, but you don't need to know my blood type or my sort of my chest measurement or my passport number.
That's exactly the concept. Yeah.
Okay. And where do you see? I appreciate you've been involved in financial markets for a long time. A lot of the activity now is coming from the regulated traditional space. What are your thoughts as we turn to 2025? Where do you see, if you like, the challenges, but also some of the opportunities then for VerifyVASP?
It's going to be, we're operating amidst a very complicated global political environment. So you have MiCA that seemed to be the answer to, a lot of uncertainty in the markets. But
as I
implementation,
say, the devil's in the detail.
I think the regulation was brilliant. The implementation is going to be very complicated. Meanwhile, you have countries like the UK who are working very hard and very quickly at catching up. U.S., all eyes are on the U.S. to see whether regulation accelerates under the new administration or not, or actually deregulates.
Yep.
And so the opportunities will appear. Asia is firing on all cylinders, right? Asia is a very fertile market for us already, and I think continues to probably lead in terms of innovation. The EU will become a very highly regulated ecosystem. Pros and cons to that. It'll be a very
hopefully
safe place.
Not too bureaucratic.
Yeah, it'll be a very safe place to do business. But I think there's real opportunity for the established banks and large institutions to become very innovative in Europe.
Yep.
But it may result in some pain for the smaller players. I think we're seeing a flurry of M&A activity. I think I read a statistic that said there's 100% increase in M&A activity of smaller CASPs, VASPs year on year.
Wow. And it's interesting you mention Asia, because looking at a recent report from McKinsey, the global consulting firm, they were talking about the amount of money that's generated on payments is about $2.2 trillion a year. 46% of that is actually out of Asia. It's not Europe, it's not America. So in terms of the revenue for a fintech business in the fintech sector, Asia is kind of where it's at. And historically, perhaps they'd taken their lead from Europe and to some extent the UK. But I think we need to be very mindful of where the money is, and the money is definitely in Asia, and that's to your point. That's where you're seeing a lot of interest in this.
Yeah, but I would also say that the digital assets industry by nature is inherently global.
Yeah.
So all of this is very true in traditional finance markets, but as DLT becomes more of a reality, I think it instantly becomes a global market.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Two Tokens podcast. If people would like to get more information about VerifyVASP or yourself, how's the best way to go about that?
There are probably two easy ways. You can reach me on LinkedIn, Elsa Madrolle, Madrolle, or Elsa at verifyvasp.com.
Super. All right.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Jonny.
you very much.
That was it for today's podcast. Thank you for listening in, and please subscribe so you don't miss out on our upcoming episodes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find our contact details at www.twotokens.org.